Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and a few weeks ago I did a joint video with Rob Groves of Truth to Power. I'm sure you know his channel. It's a really good channel, and I thoroughly recommend it. I'll put a link down below anyway. Anyway, on that occasion, Rob invited his followers to send in some questions that he and I might answer, and it seemed to go pretty well, and quite a lot of people seemed to like it. So we decided to do another one. And so this week we sat down and we produced another video, and this is it. And I hope you like it. And if you do, and you wouldn't mind liking or subscribing, I'd much appreciate it. But in the meantime, here's the video. Thank you. I've got a question here from David Stringfellow, and he says, I keep hearing about the high-skill, high-pay society to come, but what happens to the unskillable population? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm not really sure I understand what Boris Johnson means when he's cracking on about the high-skilled, high-paid economy. I mean, there's always going to be low-skilled, low-paid jobs. The way it seems to be going at the moment, Michael, is that the jobs that we're mostly lacking seem to be fairly skilled. It looks to me like this high-skilled, high-wage economy, I think what it may revert to is bringing in people from overseas to do those high-skilled, high-paid jobs, with maybe the indigenous Brits doing the low-skilled or unskilled jobs. That's the way it seems to be going at the moment. That's where the skills gaps are. You know, a shortage of nurses, a shortage of doctors. So when they talk about high-skilled, high-wage economy, it's almost like an argument for going back to freedom of movement. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that this is just another catchphrase. I think we were running out of road, or Johnson was running out of road, and he needed another catchphrase, and this is just it. It means nothing. It is completely and utterly meaningless. What is he talking about? I mean, high skill, high. If you put everybody's wages up, I mean, all that does is it just fuels inflation.
Yes.
And there will, as you say, there will always be so many people who are doing what, however you describe them, unskilled works. If you're cleaning laboratories or something, I mean, that's not a skilled work. What's going to happen to those people?
Yeah.
And not only that, if you're going to go for all this high pay, high skilled jobs, what happens to the public sector? Aren't they going to want pay increases as well?
Yes.
They'll all say this. They're high skilled workers. It's absolute madness. I mean, the Tories have been in for 11 years. I mean, haven't they had time to go into to organise all this upskilling and training and so on? I mean,
I can't see the argument that somehow the EU has stopped them from forming a high wage, high skill economy is. In what way was the EU preventing that? But the EU seemed to be the bogeyman. It's a very convenient excuse, of course.
Absolutely, it's all to do with training and education and productivity. That's the way you improve the economy, not by this sort of meaningless absolute nonsense. The Tory conference loved it, of course, and everybody's lapping it up. And all the MPs, every time they're interviewed, they're all talking about high skilled, high pay economy. But as I say, I think it's completely and utterly meaningless nonsense.
Just another catchphrase.
Catchphrase. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. David Jupp says, it's always good times are just around the corner, isn't it? How gullible are the British public? It's not going to happen. The only people who will benefit will be people who are already stinking rich. And that might go with another one, another question, which is from Shane Heff, who says, why do so many voters seem to prefer personality over competence?
I mean, personality over competence. I think with Boris Johnson, they've really hit almost electoral gold, Michael, because he's a deeply unpleasant man. With some of the comments he's made in the past, the ones he's famous for, like sort of the homophobic comments about tank top bum boys and the racist comments about pickaninnies with watermelon smiles and this sort of thing. He's saying racist, homophobic tropes, but he's saying it with a sort of bumbling clown-like persona around it, and it seems to make it more acceptable. And I think a lot of those people, certainly that I've been looking at the conference, are sort of applauding and clapping and smiling because in front of them is somebody like themselves that are actually quite hateful, are actually quite sort of antagonistic towards outsiders, or gay people, or black people, or even women. A lot of them. But Boris Johnson almost dresses it up with some sort of nice, amiable acceptance. So these particularly sort of hate-filled people, finding Boris Johnson somebody that sort of represents them, but at the same time he's palatable to the average voter that doesn't really follow politics that much, because he seems like such a nice, amiable clown. And I think he's, for the Tories, Boris is electoral gold.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that, because we live in an age of non-stop entertainment everywhere we look, and he's entertaining as Trump was entertaining and as Farage is entertaining. These are people that people turn out to listen to because they're funny, amusing, entertaining. They're great characters. I mean, the whole Johnson persona is the ruffled hair, look at me, all this stuff, is all about him. Everything is about him. And that does catch the public's eye, and people do like it. And I think there are so many people who really are not remotely interested in politics, but they'll go along with all this garbage that he's spouting all the time, and they believe in Build Back Better and taking back control, without having the slightest idea or even bothering to think about what that might mean.
He intersperses the odd phrase of Latin as well, just to sort of give it that air of the public schoolboy competence and confidence that people fall for.
Everything is about him. I mean, the mess we're in, Brexit, everything is just down to him pursuing his career.
Michael, I'm not a conservative, as you know, but I don't think Boris Johnson is either. Not the sort of conservatism, the one nation Toryism that I grew up with. I mean, he doesn't seem to have conservative principles at all. I mean, his adultery, the way he carries on his family life, it's antipathy to surely a traditional conservative.
And of course, he's known everywhere as being a liar, which is a great reputation for the leader of a substantial country. Quite extraordinary. No, as you say, really a very, very unpleasant character. But as I said in my, I don't want to bang on about my own videos, but as I said a couple of videos ago, I think he's finished, and I think he knows he's finished. There's so many signs, I think, these days that he's just run out of road. You can only go on bluffing and winging it for so long, and I think people are beginning to doubt him a lot more. I think you saw this with the three recent interviews. There was Andrew Marr, and then there was Nick Robinson on the Today programme yesterday, and then Gary Gibbon yesterday as well. And the way they're interviewing him is they're speaking as though you're an idiot. You're talking rubbish and not taking him really serious in the way they did. And the way over the pigs, with Andrew Marr, he got no idea. He just made a joke about how they were going to die anyway. The man's, he's lost it, I think, and I think he knows.
Let the pig bodies pile high, yes.
Well, exactly. As though it was a question about welfare of animals rather than the fact that you're going to burn these animals who could perfectly well be eaten. I mean, that's what they've been grown for. If you had unlimited resources, this is from Martin Jones, if you had unlimited resources, what campaign would you run to try to change the minds of those who still support Brexit?
Well, I don't mean to sort of answer that in a negative way, Michael. It's not so much what I would have done, it's what I wouldn't have done. And I remember at the time, Brexit voting friends of mine, Lexiteers and others, I think one of the biggest mistakes that the Remain campaign made was for David Cameron to send out that government taxpayer-funded leaflet urging the electorate to vote for Remain. Yes. And I think that
16 million.
How much?
That cost?
16 million pounds. Well, it went down like a lead balloon, didn't it? And every anti-Cameron, every voter with an anti-Cameron sentiment, I think that pushed them towards voting Leave, just to give the sort of finger to David Cameron. To be honest, it was like the biggest own goal. That the man was so arrogant that he assumed that his authority was going to be enough to sway people towards voting Remain. I believe it did the opposite. But I did a research for one video a few weeks back about the Aaron Banks connection and the funding, the very dodgy funding coming from Russian oligarchs associated with Putin. And it's been suggested that perhaps that blitz campaign through Facebook and other social media funded by this dodgy money with links to the Kremlin could have been responsible for between 1% and 2% swing in the vote from Remain towards Leave, and that would have been enough to tip the balance alone. So I would have put far more stringent regulations on where that funding come from. And of course, the other thing is Leave.eu broke the law. We know that through electoral funding, and the Electoral Commission handed them a fine of a few £1,000s, but it did nothing to change the result.
I think what I would have done, and I think what would have made a big difference, is if they'd gone after spending money on advertising. That is, if they'd gone after all the Instagram influencers. Some of these people got huge influences, all young people. And if they got them to do a little piece, we could have paid them just to say, how important it is to vote and what's going to happen if you don't vote. I think that would have swayed enough people to have made a big difference. We live in the social media age, and you've got to really use social media. They did it very effectively with Facebook, but I think they should have used. I think the Remain camp should have used Instagram probably. And otherwise, if you had enough money for television advertisements, get famous personalities. People are much more influenced by Ant and Dec than they are by any minister in any government. And if you could have got some famous people on the screen saying, "Look, this is crazy. We must remain," I think that would have influenced people much more than what happened and the way it was handled.
Yeah, I mean, the other mistake that David Cameron made was he almost gerrymandered against his own side. He excluded 16 and 17-year-olds from voting, for example, which would have been a massively pro-Europe vote. He stopped EU nationals living in the UK from voting. I'm not sure about this, Michael, but didn't he also prevent British people living abroad from voting as well?
Okay, another one. This is from O'Sheen, someone in Ireland, who says, where do you see the UK and specifically Northern Ireland in 5 years from now? For your information, I'm 25 years old and from the south of Ireland. What do you think?
Well, it's funny that he differentiates the Northern Ireland situation with the rest of mainland Britain, because the way, I've got a scientific background, and the way that they've set Northern Ireland up, it's almost like it's a control group. What would have happened if the UK had stayed within the EU? And I think that's going to be a big problem for Boris Johnson's government, is that Northern Ireland are going to do so much better than mainland UK because they've still got access to the single market and the customs union to all intents and purposes. And I think their economy is just going to go so well compared to mainland Britain. And I wonder if that's why your favourite person, Lord Frost, is trying so hard to... Lord Gormless, as you call him. I refer to him as that myself now in my videos. But I mean, that's maybe why he's trying to make the Northern Ireland Protocol fall apart, because they've suddenly realised that Northern Ireland could be a shining star, a beacon of what could have been for the rest of the UK.
Yes.
The softest of soft Brexits.
Yes, indeed. I would have thought inevitably, eventually, they're going to want to unite, aren't they? North and South. I mean,
I'm not a Northern Ireland expert. I have worked over there actually a few times.
Really?
Yeah. I worked at Altnagelvin Hospital near Derry, Londonderry. And I have friends over there. And I think even members of what you might think would be the loyalist community, Protestant voters, the pro-EU people are now wavering and feeling more inclined to sort of favour a unification of Ireland just because it gets them back into the EU. And that seems to be more important to them than perhaps the traditional unionist sort of tendency that the Protestants have.
Yes.
But hey, I'm no expert. I don't know, it's just a personal feeling.
No, me neither, which is why I'm really not saying much about it. I really don't know.
Right.
Might go and live there, but Ireland. I kind of envy some of these people who've got Irish passports, actually.
Yes.
A lot of people have found Irish grandparents and so on, haven't they? Besides Brexit, what do you think about the state of democracy in the UK? Hasn't Brexit and the current government shown that the UK is barely a democratic country? And which reforms do you think are necessary to improve the situation? That's from Peter Parker.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem with the democracy is the first past the post system, which rewards a party with basically a minority vote. The Conservatives, what's it, about 43% of the vote. They've suddenly got this overwhelming majority in the House of Commons. They're stuffing the second chamber, the House of Lords, with their donors and cronies. That's the biggest threat to our democracy. We really need electoral reform badly. To stop this situation happening, so that every person is represented. At the moment, we have the tyranny of the minority, I've called it in a recent video, where a minority of the population can vote in the biggest party that gets this overwhelming majority that doesn't reflect the vote, and suddenly they're allowed to become a tyrant and just walking over the opinions of people that didn't vote for them. That needs to be fixed.
Yes. But the only way we're ever going to get proportional representation is if Labour do a deal with other minority parties, which they seem adamant they don't want to do, which seems absolute madness to me. I mean, all they have to do is to enter in some sort of arrangement for one election, and they can all fall apart afterwards. It doesn't really matter, but just to get proportional representation through, and thereafter, I mean, we would have a democratic society and government.
Yeah.
As we've said before, you know, the whole of Europe and most of the world really do not have first past the post, and it just seems so out of date and so unfair. And as you say, the Conservatives are just doing everything possible to reinforce it and reinforce their position. With boundary changes and with this voter ID thing.
I mean, I agree. I think a progressive alliance standing on the one policy platform of electoral reform could just change the landscape of British politics forever.
They might have to redesign the House of Commons.
Yes, that's right. That adversarial bear pit that they shout at each other across is just a ludicrous way to set up a parliament. Yeah, quite right.
And I think the House of Lords really wants looking at as well. I mean, the fact we've got a House of Lords with Lord Lebedev of Siberia and what's he called, Botham, the cricketer.
Yes.
Yeah. And this guy who was who gave 125,000 to the Tories last week. What's he called, Malcolm Offord or something? And he immediately gets into the House of Lords, and he's making laws. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and Peter Cruddas as well, another one.
And Lord Gormless. I mean, he's in there, and all he's in there for is because he negotiated this just catastrophic deal that he,
which we now wants to rip up.
Exactly. Next question is from somebody called Offervi, and they say, I would like you to discuss the level of talent migration as a consequence of Brexit and the impact of it short and long term. I know academics in the field of physics, engineering and maths, and after Brexit many of these university professors have migrated back to their countries of origin in Europe. Well, it seems to me, if you're living here, and there's so much hostility towards Europeans anyway, a government-generated hostility, and you've got the choice of going and working anywhere in Europe, maybe anywhere in the world if you're an academic. I mean, why are you going to stay here? You know, why would you? And it seems to me inevitable that masses of people are going to flood abroad. I mean, it's just not a nice place to be right now. No. And the future's so uncertain and so on. So I'm not the least bit surprised that there's an outflow of academics and scientists and so on. I think it's almost inevitable. Yeah. And I think that probably will go on, because as you start losing these people, then others are going to go, because this country becomes a less attractive environment in which to do whatever research you're doing. So yes, I'm not surprised. I think it'll get worse. Yeah.
I think it's wider than just Brexit, Michael. I mean, just again, you know, you can only talk from personal experience, but my very best friend Simon, I was best man at his wedding out in Thailand a few years ago, and he is just unable. His wife is from Nepal. So he has a Nepalese wife, and she has been in the UK, months on, months off, especially with COVID. They did relax things, but he's had to go and live in Nepal because his wife, a bona fide wife, they've been married 3-4 years now, she cannot get a spousal visa to live in the UK. So, you know, it's the love of his life. It's the first time he's ever been married in his entire life, in his early 60s. Yep. And he's now, currently as we speak, he's now living in Kathmandu because he can't get his wife into the country. I'm not sure that the wider public understand this, of just how difficult it is for any foreigner of any nationality to actually get a visa, even if they're married to a British citizen. It's just not easy. Yes. There's this horrible xenophobia that just seems to be rampant under this government.
Yep.
You only have to look at Priti Patel and think that, you know, the sort of restrictions that she wishes to impose would have precluded her own parents from coming here. It's just hateful.
And at the same time, I heard a couple of weeks ago about four nurses who'd come here from the Philippines and had brought their 4 husbands with them, who are now delivering food on scooters, and their 10 children, and they've all got right to remain, because they are nurses. And this, of course, is what's going to happen. This is the only way of solving this problem of shortage of labour, is to let people in. And we're not going to let anybody in from Europe, partly because they don't want to come here anymore, and partly because we've been so hostile, but also we'll go around the world, and so we're going to have all these different people coming from all over the world to do the jobs that the Europeans were doing before.
Will Self, wasn't it, said he had a big spat with Mark Francois many years ago, because Will Self said that all racists and xenophobes voted for Brexit, and Mark Francois got very huffy, saying, "Are you saying that Brexit voters are all xenophobes and racists?" He said, "No, that's not what I said. Listen, I've got nothing to apologise for." But these racists and xenophobes that did vote for Brexit, I'm sure they're going to love the fact that rather than Romanians and Bulgarians coming in, it's going to be Pakistanis and Filipinos and Indians. They're going to love it, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Settling in their nice, genteel retirement towns. Yes, they're going to love it.
Yeah, it's probably apocryphal. I'm not sure it was ever said, but there was the famous quote from a Brexit voter saying, "The reason I voted for Brexit because we've got too many Pakistanis in this country." And it's like logic like that that gets us to where we are today, isn't it? It's
about the lady living in Spain who retired there, who complained about there being too many Spanish.
Yes.
Do you remember that? Yeah.
Would not surprise me.
Now that Labour has shown us that they aren't really offering anything different, is the UK becoming a failed state?
That's a really interesting question, because I think the health of our democracy does rely on a very strong opposition, and I'm just not seeing it with Labour under Starmer. And I've been told off for attacking Starmer and saying that's the trouble with people on the left, you're too fractious, you're always infighting. But I want something that's going to win us an election. I'm not a Corbyn fan. I was glad to see Corbyn go. When Starmer came in, I was a Labour Party member at the time. I didn't vote for him, but I gave, I really wanted him to succeed, but the fact is he's not being effective. He's not landing any punches on Boris Johnson at all. I think there's a real lack of a credible opposition. Unless you can talk about Ian Blackford of the SNP, who I think does an amazing job, and one of my favourite MPs is Stuart Hosey, also of the SNP. Stuart Hosey is amazing at holding this government to account, but I don't see those voices within Labour. Maybe Angela Rayner, but she's made that ridiculous scum comment recently that I think have turned off moderate voters. Or you and I have talked about that, haven't we?
Yeah. I think the thing about Ian Blackford, all he wants to do is go back to Scotland and have done with it, really. But I think, as far as Labour are concerned, I don't know. Is Starmer, is he playing a long game? Is he just waiting for it all to collapse? But if he is, he's leaving it much too late. And I think the other problem with Labour, two things at their conference. One is that the unions voted down a proportional representation. And they seem to have the power to stop it. I think that's so as they don't dilute their own power. And then you had Lisa Nandy, who I've always liked a lot, but I'm beginning to have doubts about, coming on Newsnight the other night saying that nobody wants to bring back freedom of movement. Crazy. Well, she didn't ask me. Ask me.
No, she.
I mean, it's just nonsense.
That's just playing to her constituents in Wigan, I think, isn't it? Because I have to admit that that's who I voted for Labour leader, and I'm embarrassed to admit that now, because I think she's been more pathetic than Keir Starmer since the last election. Yes.
I mean, I think the Labour Party are gambling that all these people who voted for Brexit are going to remain in favour of Brexit, and I think they fail to realise that a lot of these people are going to change their minds. A lot of them are going to regret they ever voted for Brexit, and they'll all be grumbling about it by the time of the next election.
Yeah, what was it?
And if the Labour's still going on about we've got to make the best of it and embrace it and all this sort of stuff, instead of trying to at least get back into the CU and the single market and the customs union. It ain't going to work.
I mean, already, whether you believe the polls or not, but the last one I saw where they asked, in hindsight, do you think that leaving the EU was the correct decision? It was only 46% said yes, it was, and 54% said in hindsight it was the wrong decision. Which 46, not huge, but really? Incrementally, I'm sure it will continue. That swing will continue because things ain't going to get any better. We still haven't had full Brexit regulations implemented yet. We've got the import regulations coming in next year now. They keep kicking that can down the road. Things are only going to get worse.
But I think more immediately, I think in the next few weeks and months, things are going to be drastic. The ending of the universal credit uplift and the increase in the national insurance and all the rest of it, which we all know about, and the gas prices. Look at gas.
Yeah, the point you're making is that people are going to start to feel this in their pocket over the next few months, and that's really going to focus minds, I think, on Brexit.
No, I was going to say, still the shortage of the lorry drivers and so on. I mean, even where I live in West London, I mean, it's nearly 2 weeks since this petrol shortage started, and you still can't get petrol. And this is the capital city. It's just absolutely crazy.
Well, I'm down in the West Country. I managed to get some petrol yesterday. It was capped at £20. So, but according to the government, according to the government, the crisis is now over. So,
Yeah. And of course, the other thing about the government, it's worth mentioning in passing, is that it's business that's responsible for all this chaos. It's business because the lorry drivers, the businesses didn't provide enough truck stops or something, or quality truck stops. What's it got to do with the owner of a fleet of lorries as to what the truck stops are like? I mean, that's nothing to do with it. This is from Chris Town. At least they've realised their driver visa scheme is flawed and have now extended the periods by which some drivers may be allowed to come and work in the UK. However, they will stick with Johnson until he becomes a threat to the success of the party, and then I can actually see him being thrown out of 10 Downing Street more rapidly than either Thatcher or May.
Well, this goes back to something I said earlier, Michael, that I don't believe that Boris Johnson is truly a Tory. I don't believe, by the way, that he was pro-Brexit. You know, those very famous twin articles he wrote, one arguing for Brexit and one arguing against, and he jumped on the horse that he thought was most likely to carry him to the Tory leadership. I don't think he's a proper Conservative, and I don't believe that many Conservatives believe that he's a proper Conservative in the traditional sense. The reason they have him, as I said earlier, he's electoral gold. He has these foul, nasty, hate-filled views about foreigners, about gay people, about women, and he dresses it up in a sort of clowny, charm offensive type persona. But they don't like him, I don't think. They love him as a leader because he's doing well in the polls. His approval rating is far better than Keir Starmer's. But the moment that stops being true, they will dispatch him with glee, I would imagine. Some people will be glad to see the back of him. As long as he's an electoral advantage, he stays. The moment he becomes a liability, he's gone. That's what I think.
I watched his speech earlier today, and it was the usual sort of bluster and wisecracks and a few jokes and so on. Somehow the gloss had come off as far as I could see. The response, the applause wasn't as effusive as you would normally expect. And the extraordinary thing was he just went and grabbed his wife and just marched right out.
Maybe there was a fridge that needed inspecting. Yes.
But I thought that was a bit odd. But I, as you say, I don't think. I think the twin set brigade in the old colonels, I think they all absolutely love him. But I think in Parliament, I suspect not many MPs like him, and I should think a lot of them are already thinking about getting rid of him. As I said before, I've stuck my neck out. I just don't think he's finished. But
when's he on his way, Michael?
I don't know, Rob. I have no idea. No idea. Won't be long. He won't be
long.
He won't be there next year this time. Definitely not.
Really?
Yeah.
Within a year, you think?
Because I think there are so many problems to confront. The shortage and the price increases and so on, and the austerity that's coming, and then there's Northern Ireland to sort out. It's all just going to be one problem after another. And I don't think his heart's really in it. He doesn't like management, and he doesn't like poring over documents and all the rest of it. He just wants to be all he wants is to be on the television. He wants to be on the front page of the newspapers. He's just a showman, and that's what it's all about. Just like Trump. I mean, Trump never wanted to sit down going through legislation on his desk. He wanted to just get on and show everybody what a smart ass he was, and Johnson's the same. Incidentally, I don't think he's I don't think he's an intellectual. I think he's very clever, very, very knowledgeable. I mean, the amount of information he's got is just phenomenal, and he's able to write biographies and so on because it's all about facts and so on. But I don't think he's an intellectual. I don't think he's somebody who can look at a problem and really work out an answer. No. I think he's very indecisive, as we saw with all the coronavirus delays and the dithering about lockdowns and so on. And I think he relied on Cummings to tell him what to do in the early stages. And then, of course, his wife got rid of Cummings, and I think she's probably the one telling him what to do these days. But I don't think he's not an original thinker, and that's not a good thing for somebody who's a prime minister.
No. Well, just an example from this week of what you're saying: the U-turn on the public inquiry into the Met Police. On Sunday it was never going to happen. It was a matter for the internal police complaints commission, and suddenly a couple of days later they were announcing a public inquiry that they'd ruled out 2 days before. It's just typical of this government, these incredible U-turns all the time.
Yes, it's always just following. Sorry. Go ahead, sorry.
No. There are certain politicians you don't agree with, but you still want to listen to what they're saying because it gives you an indication of really what might happen. But there's absolutely no point listening to Boris Johnson because whatever he says means nothing.
No,
he's not bound by it. We've seen that, not just international agreements, but what he's saying to BBC interviewers or his press conferences or what he says at conference. It doesn't even show you where his direction of planning is because there is no direction. He just says whatever's in his mind at the time.
No, there's no planning at all, and that's what Gary Gibbon said to him on Channel 4 last night. You haven't got any plan, have you? And he blustered away, but it clearly hasn't got a plan. I mean, this whole as we were saying just now, this whole transforming the economy from low skill, low pay to high skill, high pay, complete and utter nonsense. I mean, it's just something.
It doesn't mean anything.
There's no plan there. Just another catchphrase, another slogan.
Well, we've moved on from this one as well, but the social care plan that he said he already had it written when he was elected to number 10 Downing Street. We've now had the national insurance hike to pay for it, and we know absolutely to the finest detail how the money's being raised, mainly from the less well-off in society, but we still have got no clue as to where exactly it's going in the social care system. They said temporarily some of it's going to be diverted to the NHS, but we still have got no idea what the plan is for social care in this country. The broken social care system, I should say.
I think the social care sector is going to be the next problem with shortage of staff, because I think there are a lot of people leaving. It's extremely hard and demanding work. And because so many people have gone back to the EU, they're having to work even harder, and I think people are getting burnt out. And I think that'll be the next crisis, because you can't have old people dying in their homes because they don't get fed or they don't get washed or whatever.
Yeah. And, it's very personal to me, Michael. I'm a carer for my brother-in-law, much older. Brother-in-law's paranoid schizophrenic, was released from hospital recently. He was actually held in hospital a week longer than he needed to be because they wanted to put a full-time care plan in place for him. He was released about a month ago now. This full-time care plan has now descended into 2 half-an-hour visits a day, one at 9:30 and one at 12:30.
Really?
He's then left for the rest of the day all by himself. So it's just unbelievable. And we've challenged the social care providers about this. It's obviously contracted out, but they're saying it's just shortage of staff. All the Eastern Europeans have gone home. They just do not have the staff. But it's just a broken system. I mean, it's all farmed out. We're on our third private provider now that's being contracted by the local council. It seems to change every few months who they're actually contracting out to, because they all have these staffing problems post-Brexit. But the social care system is absolutely broken. I know that for a fact from personal experience. It's completely broken.
And I know that particularly these private providers, I mean, the people they employ are under such pressure to just get the job done in and out in half an hour or whatever it is, and they haven't got the time to give proper attention to people. And it's a really serious problem. Okay, what level of disaster has to happen in the UK before the general population cries enough? The UK is jumping from one crisis to the next. Being in crisis seems to be the accepted norm. That's from somebody called Bronze God.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound too much like a psychologist with this one, but I think the human brain makes up its mind about something and then casts around for evidence to support the decision it's already made. It's called confirmation bias. And I think, in terms of this realisation of what's happening in society, I think Brexit voters are just desperately in denial. They're trying to find reasons to support the decision they made. But the decision they made wasn't based on fact, it was based on feeling. Facts don't really come into it. And I don't know what crisis is going to happen where they're not going to somehow square it away, blame it on the EU or say it's nothing to do with Brexit. They will carry on doing that, I think, in the short term. I think, you and I have had this conversation, Michael. It's more likely to be an incremental change. I don't think people are very good at just admitting that they've made the wrong decision. I think it's a bit more complex than that. So it's like a drip, drip,
Yeah. I can forgive anybody who voted for Brexit. I can forgive anybody who voted Conservative in 1919 because there was so much misleading information and people didn't have time and people weren't that interested. But anybody who supports it now, I just think, they are just frankly stupid. I know I get lots of comments about that, but if you still think Brexit's a good idea, you are stupid.
Yeah.
It's clearly absolute madness. But I think, as you say, it will be incremental, although I do think Christmas is probably going to be quite important, because I think if there are shortages of toys in the shops and shortages of food for Christmas and shortages of turkeys, people will get really quite cross about that, and then they'll be down the pub grumbling about it. So I think Christmas might be quite an important point. And of course, after Christmas, we've got January, February, March, which is going to be very miserable, especially if gas and electricity prices are going up and so on. But it just, as you said before, it's not going to get any better. It isn't going to suddenly turn around. It's not as though, it'll be all right in 6 weeks' time. It ain't going to be that. It's going to go on and on and on this. And it's just going to grind us all down. And at the same time, we've got this comedian telling us that it's all wonderful and we're transforming society. This is from Gerald Wagner. I'd like to know what you think about the deterioration of the relationship between the UK and the EU. How bad can it get in the worst case?
The relationship between the UK and the EU, I think the main plank of that relationship is the current government. I think it's the question is really about the relationship with the EU and the UK government as it stands at the moment. I hope that's true anyway. I do believe that the relationship with the EU will continue to get worse and worse so long as Boris Johnson's cabal are in charge and as long as Lord Gormless is at the negotiating table. I cannot see any way it's going to get better. The only solution, the only way to start to build bridges and mend those relationships with the EU is to get rid of this government. As simple as that. Until that happens, I think it's only going to get worse.
It almost seems to have been a deliberate policy to antagonise the EU so as to make them the enemy. And of course, the Daily Express and the Sun love all this. But the idea that they're to blame for everything, and I think what is going to be interesting is when we see how they are going to recover quite quickly, I think, over the coming few months and years. And at the same time, we're going to be struggling for a very long time. And then the idea of them being responsible if everything went wrong will look rather silly. Here's quite a nice one, actually. This is from Jason Karkin. And he says, I'd love to ask you a question on your views on young people in British society. I'm 24 and have recently graduated to the worst job market imaginable following a pandemic and would appreciate your thoughts. Jason.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think there's something really interesting. I think these are times that we've never seen before. There's this accepted wisdom that as people get older, and that 24-year-old that's asked this question gets older and older, the idea is that as you grow older, you tend to get more and more right-wing, you tend to vote Conservative. And I'm just not sure that's going to be true with the current younger generations, because as they grow up, they're not having the same advantages that their parents or grandparents had, where they're earning enough to afford to be able to buy their own property, where they can look forward to a decent state pension that actually almost provides a livable income. Those days are gone. And I think this current generation, and even the slightly older generation now in their 30s, they're not going to demographically sort of gravitate towards the Conservatives like their parents did, because they won't be having the advantages that their parents had. They won't be homeowners. Yes. They won't be able to look forward to a sustainable old age pension from the state. And I think
they'll all be in debt.
Yeah, they'll all be in debt. They'll all be paying off their student loans and things. And I think longer term, I am so optimistic, Michael. I'm often accused, as I know you are, of whinging all the time and whining. Yep. But actually, I'm actually very optimistic. I'm just not sure it's going to be in my lifetime. But I think the future of Britain is very much going to be a far more progressive, sort of Scandinavian type system, dare I call it socialism, but certainly social democracy, where everybody's provided for. Eventually, as you and I have discussed in the past, maybe a universal basic income of some sort, but that's the future, not the sort of Conservative Party's current policies, these hate-filled, xenophobic policies that are cutting Britain off from the world, making us the opposite of whatever global Britain is. We're the opposite of that at the moment.
Yes.
But I think it will change as those Tory voters who are overwhelmingly an older demographic, as they they die off and the younger people come up and don't get the advantages their previous generations have done, I think it will overwhelmingly, the electorate will swing to the left, to the more progressive end of the spectrum. Tell me I'm wrong. I don't know, but that's my optimism.
No, I'm not telling you wrong at all. I'm not sure. I'm as optimistic as you are. I'm not sure that things are going to work out. Not for a very long time. I think the damage being done at the moment is so great. It's going to take a very long time to put right, and we're going to be so much poorer after this catastrophe of Brexit. But Jason, the questioner, doesn't say what he studied, what he's qualified in. But I think if I were a young person now, I'd want to study something to do with computers, something with IT, and I think, or maybe psychology, something like that, something that has clearly got a future. And I think if I were him, frankly, and I was 24, I'd be looking to emigrate to somewhere like Canada, because I just don't see much of a future for some time for young people here. I think we're going to be the poor man in Europe again, and we've never had great productivity. Our education is not great. We're not well beating at anything, except of course our famous new tennis player, who Boris Johnson tried to ride on the back of her success in his conference speech by mentioning,
of course,
British success.
As did Nigel Farage, who famously said he didn't want to live next door to Romanians.
Exactly.
I do agree. I mean, despite my optimism, I do agree with you, Michael. I mean, if I was 40 years younger, I would be looking elsewhere.
Here's a question from Ian Parker, which you might have views on. What will happen when we dump CE and go to UKCA? We should explain. We should explain what they are. Do you want to do that?
If you like, I mean, CE was the European Union safety standard, basically. So it's a bit more complex than that. And the UKCA is meant to be the British equivalent that replaces CE for post-Brexit Britain. The question is quite interesting because they're talking about dumping CE. But that's not what's going to happen, because any British exporter that wants to export to European markets will have to comply with CE as well as UKCA. So this big selling point of Brexit, that somehow it was going to cut bureaucracy and all the rest of it, you're actually doubling the red tape required for manufacturers to go through in order to make sure that their products are accredited to be sold in Europe. They've got to get the UKCA and the CE now, so it's literally doubled red tape, and it's purely because of Brexit.
Well, I've been buying goods, for much of my lifetime, been buying goods in China, and for a very long time, everything's had to be CE approved, and that's involved testing and all the costs of testing. Every single product has to be tested and get a certification and so on. And what this is going to mean is that in future you're going to have to get everything retested at huge expense and inconvenience, and probably a lot of Chinese manufacturers aren't going to be bothered with it. But it's for absolutely nothing. It's just so utterly senseless. It's like bringing back pounds and ounces. I mean, just pointless. They're making a point. It was like Galileo, wasn't it? We wanted out of that because we wanted to do our own until we realised it would be too expensive. It's just sort of trying to make differences, and this seems to be the most.
It's like
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Michael. No, I was just going to say it's like the Erasmus scheme. There was no reason why we had to leave Erasmus, where it provided opportunities for British youngsters to study abroad in European universities. Exactly. We decided to leave that scheme when we Brexited. There was absolutely no reason to do that. It was just like a cut your nose off to spite your face type move.
Absolutely. It's just utterly pointless and inconvenient and expensive. And we will pay for it. Businesses will pay for it. The consumer will end up paying for all this utter nonsense. As all of the bureaucracy we've created. Of course, as you mentioned briefly before, we're not imposing any import controls at the moment. Stuff is flooding in here from Europe. Well, sooner or later we're going to have to. I know they keep putting it off. Sooner or later we're going to have to impose import controls, and that's going to add hugely to the cost of goods coming here. Apart from the fact that, of course, a lot of people will stop exporting from the EU to the UK. And just really not quite on that subject, but going on from that, this business with the farmers and all these fields full of rotting crops and all these pigs that are going to be slaughtered and so on and burnt. Those farmers aren't going to rear more pigs next year. They're not going to plant more crops next year. They're all going to say sod it. We'll pay off.
Yeah.
We'll pay off the mortgage, or we'll sell the farm, or they may have to sell the farm. They're not going to just go on with it in the hope that maybe next year it'll get through. They're all losing an absolute fortune. And so that's going to add to, with the import controls coming out, to food shortages. There will be food shortages next year. I'm absolutely certain of it. And that's not going to play well. This is from Sunny Sunday. Where do you think the UK will end up in the long term? What do you think of the claims that in the long term there could be benefits to Brexit? The euro currency crisis could return, another refugee crisis like in 2015 could happen, and maybe England is better protected from these events being outside the EU.
I mean, yeah, never say never, but I just feel like Britain is now sort of cast out to the open seas all by itself without the protection of this safety net with 27 other countries sort of covering our back and mitigating any crises.
Yes.
The euro crisis never seemed to really hurt the major economies. I know Greece suffered a lot, Portugal, Spain to a lesser extent, but the EU didn't really suffer, and I don't think Britain would have suffered had it been part of the euro at the time. I'm not the biggest fan of the euro. This idea that somehow the refugee crisis, with global warming and this prediction that mass populations are going to be gravitating north from the tropics to escape the ravages of global warming. Being outside the EU actually makes us more vulnerable to this sort of mass immigration uncontrolled, because while we were in the EU we had an arrangement with France that they would take asylum seekers, refugees back that were apprehended in the Channel. We've lost that by leaving the EU. We don't have that safety net anymore, so it actually makes the UK more vulnerable. It's a more volatile world that we're living in without the risks being spread across 28 countries. We take those risks solely by ourselves. It's going to make Britain far more vulnerable, far more volatile in terms of how we're affected by economic ravages and climate ravages as well.
I can't really add anything to that, Rob. I think that's exactly what I would have said. What I'd like to have said. No, you're right. And as we're saying, what happens if there's another euro crisis? What about a sterling crisis? Much more likely, I would have thought. And we are completely on our own. I mean, the idea in this day and age of being on your own and think that's better than working with the biggest market in the world, I mean, it's just we've said it many times before. It is crazy. Yeah. The other thing I would say is about China. I've had a lot of dealings with China over the years, and I've seen how hugely powerful they've become, how immensely rich and strong and confident they are. And I can see as our economy weakens, I can see them moving in like vultures. I can see as businesses get into trouble, they'll come in and they'll pick the best ones, and they're going to start buying up a lot of this farmland. They're going to start buying up more and more and more. And that's a frightening prospect anyway. And that's something that, I mean, as a country on our own, we can't stand up to China. At least the EU can stand up to China because it's a big enough market. But frankly, China can just walk all over us, and I think that's something we should all be very concerned about. Paul Holdstock says, how can we get out of this mess? How can we change things? Is it too late now? And has the country sunk too far to save it?
It's similar answer I've given before. I mean, as long as Boris Johnson's government is in charge, things are going to get worse and worse, and getting rid of that government is the first step. How long it will take to repair the damage that's been done since 2016, it's probably going to be years and years. The damage that's been done in such short a space of time is going to take years and years to undo. But the very first step has got to be getting rid of this particular government. I'm not even being party political about this. And clearly, I'd rather see a Labour government, but even a Conservative government that was less extreme, that wasn't so xenophobic and so anti-Europe and going out of their way to antagonise our neighbours. That's got to be the first step, and let's see where we go from there. But as long as this government's in power, things are just going to get worse and worse.
Yeah, you might have seen that 5'1" of hate and bile yesterday at the Tory conference, the Home Secretary talking about clamping down on free movement and ending free movement, and the whole audience were just beside themselves cheering. And you just think, what's in these people's minds? I mean,
I don't know. That's your rights that have been taken away, and my rights that have been taken away. And people cheer it as though it's some sort of huge gain.
Did you, and if so, do you still support the privatisations that the Thatcher government started? If you had your time over again, would you still try and personally profit from business with China? And do you really support the right of free speech. With regards to privatisation, I'm not opposed to it. I think the only thing about privatisation is that you must have very, very tough regulation. It's absolutely vital. You can't have people selling stuff off and behaving irresponsibly with state utilities and so on. And I remember, because I'm old enough to, I remember when British Rail belonged to the government. I remember when British Airways belonged to the government, and my goodness me, they were so badly run and so inefficient and so incompetent. And so I'm not opposed to privatisation as such. I just think it must be very tightly regulated. With regard to would I still personally want to profit from business with China? Well, I originally was buying goods from Italy. And this was many, many years ago when Italy was full of craftsmen. Everywhere you went, there were craftsmen. And suddenly the Chinese came in and started copying all these. They copied everything. And not only did they copy it, but they made it much cheaper. As good, if not better quality, and their deliveries were absolutely spot on. And you were faced with a position whereby if you didn't go to China and buy from China, you were going to go out of business because your competitors would. And gradually all the workshops and so on in Italy started closing, and they all closed eventually. And that's happened with industry after industry after industry. We've all been suckered really, because we've all found it so much easier to go off to China and buy stuff cheaply, and to hell with local producers, and we've preferred to enjoy ourselves and spend money and have lots of holidays and a new car every year and all the rest of it that the luxuries that we couldn't afford, but stacking up the credit card for the day of reckoning, which is obviously now or going to be very soon. And so I really, as regards whether I wanted to or not, as regards buying from China, there was no option. If you were trading in those days, there was no option but to buy from China. And the Chinese have known that, and that's how they've become the richest country, or second richest country in the world. And the right to free speech, well, obviously, absolutely. Nobody can argue against the right to free speech. And I think we should be a little bit worried about the Home Secretary's bill, which seeks to restrict what journalists can write.
Priti Patel at the moment is doing the police and crimes legislation bill, isn't she, where she's trying to criminalise the rights of journalists to use leaked documents from the newspaper, so basically making whistleblowing illegal. On the other hand, she's trying to ban protests that cause a nuisance or noise, which basically gives the Home Secretary the right to ban any protest she doesn't like the sound of.
Yes.
There's also this measure at the moment, and I'm not defending the Insulate Britain people that have been sitting on motorways and things, but she is criminalising this. She is making them 6-month prison sentences mandatory. And probably not the brightest idea to inconvenience people, and not a great way to get people on side for your campaign, but really 6 months in prison for sitting on a motorway. I mean, it sounds like a totalitarian state.
Absolutely. And that particular announcement got the biggest cheer yesterday, I think, the fact they were going to put them in prison.
It's like the people cheering the loss of freedom of movement. They seem to cheer any rights that she removes are greeted with cheers by this Conservative Party.
Yes.
It should be horrifying them. They're meant to
be
a democracy. We're getting more like Hungary all the time.
As a matter of interest, I got this comment on one of my latest video just a few minutes ago before we started filming this, and it said as following. It said, I'm Polish, and I can tell you that lots of lorry drivers from the UK went to Germany, France, Netherlands and Denmark instead of returning to the UK. Why would they come back? There are 3 major reasons. First, all the countries I mentioned are close to Poland, Slovakia and Czech Republic, easier to visit family and come back doesn't take that long and so on. And you're saving a lot of time. Secondly, wages are now similar with lower living costs. And thirdly, and my apologies for saying this, but why would we come somewhere we are not welcome?
Yeah.
P.S. Eastern Europe. Sorry, and I was just saying. P.S. Eastern European countries also had in the past adverts about temporary jobs in the UK. That's why we came to do them. Obviously, that's no longer the case. Yeah. So that's from the horse's mouth, so to speak, as regards the shortage of drivers. That's why they're not coming back.
Yeah. Well, I've had some flack for this, saying this, Michael, and I've had to justify myself. But my wife is from a Polish immigrant family, and she looks Polish. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, anybody that's been to Poland, no, there is a sort of Polish look. She's got the very wide cheekbones. She's got the blue eyes, the blonde hair. She looks Polish, and although she's actually, one of her parents is English, but. She's treated like a Pole, and she said since Brexit, even her music teacher said to her, well, you wouldn't understand how us British people feel about this. And it's like she's suddenly not British because she's got a Polish sort of Polish look, you know. I can understand these Polish lorry drivers, what they must experience from the public here, because my wife in the West Country has this antipathy from people because they think she's Polish.
Has that always been the case, or is it recently?
It's just recently. I mean, okay, we've lived most of our life in London. We moved down to the West Country 7 years ago. But certainly in the last 4 or 5 years, or since the advisory referendum back in 2016, there has been a definite shift. You know, we're living in Brexit land down here. Yeah. And she you know, it's racism in its very, very sort of slightest form. I can only imagine what it'd be like if she had a darker skin, you know, the sort of antipathy that those minorities must face. But it's bad enough being a white-skinned Polish-looking woman, the sort of antipathy that she experiences.
And this is the sort of prejudice that we've spent decades trying to minimise, isn't it? And there were, certainly in London, there was, you know, hardly any prejudice. I think, say before the referendum, it's only just suddenly all foreigners are to be hated. It's almost encouraged by the government. Yes, it's a whole change of culture, but it's terrible, isn't it? Because it's so stupid. It just shows the ignorance of people that they should be prejudiced against other nations. It's just you know, it's just beyond stupid. But
regression,
I'm sorry
isn't
to
it?
hear that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's just regression, isn't it? It's like winding back the clock. Brexit wound back the clock to this sort of these so-called halcyon days of Britain as a sovereign nation, and the trouble is we are returning to some of those attitudes, the racism, the homophobia, the sexism. It all seems to be coming back at the moment. It's
it's going to be difficult to reverse it. Very, very difficult.